night had started like any other for Ryan. Since taking the night security job at the Springfield warehouse, he had grown accustomed to the monotony of the shift. The absolute silence was only occasionally broken by the hum of electrical transformers or the distant rumble of a passing train. It was an easy job and he didn't complain. After years in the military, the calm was a welcome change. That night, the sky was moonless, and the heavy clouds made the air feel oppressive. Ryan was sipping bitter coffee in the small office when the lights started flickering. He cursed under his breath. With the approaching storm, power outages weren't unusual. Grabbing his flashlight and radio, he stepped out to check the main breaker. The warehouse was vast with corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly. The flashlight cast shadows that elongated and trembled against the concrete walls, forming shapes that made Ryan's eyes linger longer than he liked. Reaching the control panel, he found everything in order, which was odd. Still, he reset the system, and the lights briefly came back on, only to go out again. It was at that moment he heard the noise for the first time. A metallic clang echoed from a distance, something like a steel bar hitting concrete. Ryan froze for a second. He knew he was the only one there, or at least he should be. Trying to stay calm, he followed the sound. His footsteps echoed on the cold floor as he moved through the darkened corridors. Turning a corner, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. A light. Small, flickering, as if someone else were using a flashlight. But it wasn't his. Before he could call out or ask who was there, the light vanished. Ryan stood still, his heavy breathing filling the absolute silence that followed. Forcing himself to move, he approached the spot where he'd seen the light. There was nothing there, just empty shelves and the familiar smell of aged wood and metal. Deciding to return to the office and call for help, he turned back. But on his way, something even more unsettling stopped him in his tracks. Footprints, wet ones, as if someone had been walking through the warehouse in soaked boots. The prints led to a side corridor. Against his better judgment, he followed them. The corridor seemed to narrow as Ryan advanced. The air changed. There was a metallic smell like blood or rust. Then he heard the whispers. Low, almost imperceptible, but definitely voices. He aimed his flashlight, but nothing was there. That's when the adrenaline kicked in. Someone was there with him. Ryan backed away, his footsteps muffled by the concrete. The silence in the corridor was so heavy, he could hear his own breathing echo. He knew he shouldn't, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. His flashlight wavered slightly, reflecting his unsteady hands. Then he heard it again. Not the whispers, but something dragging across the floor. It was rhythmic, like something being pulled, growing closer and closer. He spun around, illuminating the corridor behind him. Nothing. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice thundering through the empty corridors. No response. But the sound continued, now clearer. It wasn't coming from behind. It was ahead. Ryan steadied his flashlight and took a few hesitant steps toward the noise. Turning another corner, he saw something that made his throat tighten. A crowbar leaned against the wall. He was certain it hadn't been there minutes earlier. "I'm not playing around, I'm armed." Ryan lied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He picked up the crowbar, gripping it as an improvised weapon. Before he could decide his next move, the sound of something metallic crashing echoed again, this time from the storage area. Ryan rushed toward the noise. When he arrived, his eyes caught something even stranger. A row of boxes that had been neatly stacked earlier were now scattered, as if someone had deliberately dragged and stacked some of them into a makeshift barricade. Ryan shone his light around, searching for any sign of movement, but everything was still. Then he noticed something on the wall beside him. A symbol, crudely drawn in a dark red substance. He moved closer and realized it wasn't paint. It looked like blood. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger now. Ryan spun around, shining his light behind him, and he saw it. For just a moment, before it vanished into the darkness, a tall, thin figure. It wore something black, and what looked like a mask glinted faintly in the weak light. It said nothing but stood long enough for Ryan to realize one thing. He was not alone. Ryan ran. He didn't know where, but he needed to get away. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Heavy boots echoed down the corridors. He reached the office and locked the door, his lungs burning. Grabbing his phone to call the police, he found there was no signal. The power to the building seemed completely cut. Suddenly, the security monitor flickered. Only one camera still worked, showing the main corridor. The emergency lights cast flickering shadows, but among them, Ryan saw something that froze his blood. 3 figures now walked slowly toward the office. One of them held something shiny. It looked like an axe. Ryan gripped the crowbar, his last line of defense, and positioned himself behind the door. The footsteps grew louder, followed by a soft, rhythmic knocking. Not a knock asking for entry, but something mechanical and menacing, as if they were toying with him. Then, everything went silent. The silence was more terrifying than the footsteps. Ryan held his breath, waiting for the attack. But instead, he heard the sound of something being scratched into the door. A single word appeared, grotesquely written, almost childlike. Run. Ryan needed no further encouragement. He bolted through a side exit leading to the parking lot and ran as fast as he could. The rain poured in torrents, making the ground slippery, but he didn't stop to look back. He only stopped when he reached the main road, where a passing truck driver, seeing his desperation, offered help. Later, when the police arrived, they found no one in the warehouse. No figures, no symbols, not even the scattered boxes. Just an open door and the lights turned off. The official report labeled the incident as inconclusive, but Ryan knew the truth. Since that night, he's never slept soundly. He moved to another city, switched jobs, but sometimes on the quietest nights he swears he hears footsteps and whispers right outside his window. In the small town of Willow Creek, in the state of Maine, Patrick Wallace never imagined he would return to the house where he spent his entire childhood. But after losing his job in Boston, he had no choice. With his bank account in the red and few options in sight, his mother offered the basement as a temporary refuge. It was a cozy space, set up like a small apartment, but still, it was the basement, cold, damp, and filled with buried memories. On that Friday, the most violent storm in months raged through the town. Thunder echoed through the old house's structure, as if voices were screaming from an unseen world. Patrick, alone, tried to distract himself by watching TV. The heavy rain pelted against the small windows at the top of the basement walls, creating an almost hypnotic sound. A little after 11 at night, the lights flickered once, twice, and everything went dark. Great, Patrick muttered, grabbing his phone. No Wi-Fi, no power, just a makeshift flashlight in his hand. He had no intention of checking the breaker in the garage, not while the sky was falling apart outside. Instead, he threw himself on the couch, pulled up a blanket, and tried to relax. That's when the first sound came. A dull thud, directly on the window closest to his bed. Patrick froze, his heart racing. Maybe a branch blown by the wind? He tried to ignore it, but the sound repeated, louder this time, as if something was insistently tapping on the glass. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, standing up slowly. With his phone in hand, he walked to the window and aimed the beam of light. For a moment, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Rain poured in torrents, streaming down the glass in winding lines. Then, something moved. Outside, pressed against the glass, a human face appeared. Pale as the moon, with wide, empty eyes, the face stared at him with a chilling intensity. Patrick instinctively stepped back, nearly dropping his phone. When he finally blinked, the figure was gone. His heart pounded. He called his mother, but the call failed. No signal. Then came the second sound, footsteps, but not from outside. They came from above, inside the house. Patrick felt his stomach drop. He was alone, or at least he was supposed to be. Carefully, he climbed the narrow stairs connecting the basement to the house. When he reached the top, he saw something that made his muscles lock. 3 shadows moved in the living room, illuminated by flashlights. One of them held something long and heavy. "He's down there. Find him," a male voice said. They knew his name. Without thinking, Patrick retreated to the basement. His hands trembled as he searched for an escape. The only option was the window that had scared him moments before. He grabbed a chair, smashed it against the glass until it shattered, and climbed out, ignoring the cuts on his hands and arms. He ran. The cold rain and mud engulfed him as he fled without looking back. Patrick ran like he had never run before, his lungs burning as his feet sank into the mud and the rain lashed his face. He didn't dare look back, but the feeling of being pursued was inescapable. Finally, he reached the end of the street, where his phone vibrated in his hand. Signal. Without hesitation, he dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? There are people in my house. They're chasing me. They're armed. Please send help. The operator tried to keep him calm, but his voice was shaky, frantic. She assured him that a patrol car was on its way. Patrick kept running until he found shelter under the awning of a closed store, where he waited shivering, until red and blue lights lit up the rain-soaked sky. The police arrived quickly and entered the house while Patrick waited in the patrol car. A few minutes later, one of the officers returned with a grave expression. "There's no one inside. Everything's locked." "What do you mean locked?" Patrick asked, outraged. "I saw them. I heard them saying my name." The officer frowned. "We found footprints in the basement and marks on the broken window, but nothing indicating a deeper intrusion. There are no signs anyone was upstairs." Patrick insisted, describing the men and the face he had seen at the window, but the officer's explanations only fueled his unease. It was as if they didn't believe him. "We'll continue patrolling the area, sir. Maybe it was someone trying to scare you." Patrick knew it wasn't just that. It couldn't be. The next morning, after a sleepless night, Patrick decided to investigate on his own. He started in the basement, sweeping the floor for any clues. It didn't take long to find something that made his stomach churn. A small carving in the wooden frame of the broken window. It was a name. Wallace. His last name. Patrick stepped back, his thoughts spinning. Who would carve that? And why? Before he could think further, something caught his attention. A muffled noise coming from one of the walls. A rhythmic sound like something lightly tapping from the other side. Driven by curiosity, Patrick moved an old shelf leaning against the wall and found a hidden door. The wood creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a narrow passage he never knew existed. In the darkness, he advanced with his phone as a flashlight, his feet stumbling over debris. At the end of the passage, a small, stifling room emerged. The walls were covered with old newspaper clippings, photos, and chaotic scribbles. In the center was a single wooden chair facing an old TV and a stack of VHS tapes. Patrick picked up the tape at the top of the pile, marked with a yellowed label that read, 1995 Wallace. With his heart in his throat, he inserted the tape into the old player. The screen flickered, and then the image appeared. A recording of his family, in the same basement nearly 30 years ago. He recognized his younger parents talking and laughing, until someone behind the camera spoke in a deep, unsettling voice. "He'll be perfect. It's only a matter of time." The recording ended abruptly, leaving Patrick staring at his own reflection on the black screen. The mystery deepened. He picked up more tapes and saw similar scenes, footage of his family being watched, recorded by someone who clearly lived there, in the shadows of his own home. The last tape, however, was different. It showed external footage, filmed the night before. The image shook as the camera captured Patrick breaking the window and running into the rain. A familiar cold voice whispered, "He knows now." Patrick dropped the tape to the floor, his heart pounding. Someone had been watching. Someone was still there or might come back at any moment. Suddenly a sharp sound echoed through the basement. Footsteps, slow and heavy, coming from the secret entrance he had just discovered. Patrick didn't have the courage to look. He just ran. The police returned to the house hours later, called by neighbors who heard screams in the early morning. They found the basement empty except for tapes scattered across the floor. Patrick was missing. Investigations revealed something even more macabre. The hidden space behind the wall wasn't part of the house's original plans, but seemed to have been used for decades. The tapes contained footage dating back to different families who had lived there, each being watched by an unidentified individual. None of them were ever found. Weeks later, a neighbor reported seeing a pale man standing in the rain outside the basement window, with a disturbing smile on his face. When the police arrived, the house was empty again. Patrick Wallace became just another name on a long list of missing persons surrounding the house in Willow Creek. Adam Carter arrived home under a steady light rain, the wind blowing with an irritating force that made him clutch his coat tightly against his chest. He parked his silver sedan in the driveway, staring at the dark windows. It was already past 11, and after a long day spent trying to convince people to buy used cars, all he wanted was to crack open a beer and forget the world. The house at the end of the street had a charm that contrasted with the gloomy night. It was a wooden structure painted light blue with a covered porch. Adam had bought the house after his divorce, hoping to restart his life in a quiet place. Tranquility, however, was a rare commodity in his mind. He entered, tossed his keys onto the kitchen counter, and opened the fridge. Grabbing a bottle of beer, he was about to take a sip when something caught his attention. A faint creaking sound coming from the back of the house. He froze, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the living room. It's just the house settling in the cold, he thought, trying to push away the unease. However, before he could fully convince himself, a sudden blackout plunged the house into total darkness. The beer slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, spraying shards and foam everywhere. "Damn it," Adam muttered, trying to stay calm. He groped his way to the counter, searching for his phone to use the flashlight. As soon as the screen illuminated the kitchen, muffled footsteps echoed from upstairs. He froze. It can't be. He was alone. He was sure of it. Swallowing hard, Adam unlocked the door and stepped out into the chilly night air. The wind felt stronger now, whistling through the trees that surrounded the yard. From where he stood, he glanced up at the second floor and saw flickering lights in one of the bedrooms. Flashlights. Someone was inside. Adam's heart raced. He grabbed his phone and frantically called Lucy Grant, his neighbor, who happened to be a police officer. As he waited for her to answer, his attention was drawn to something even more unsettling. The gate leading to the power box was open, the padlock hanging from a severed chain. "Adam? What's going on?" Lucy's voice came through the line. "There's someone in my house. I think they cut the power to get in. Get out of there now, I'm coming over. Call 911. Before he could respond, the sound of shattering glass pierced the night. Adam turned just in time to see a dark figure emerge from inside the house, jumping out of the living room window. The intruder, tall and hooded, stopped for a moment to stare at him. Adam couldn't see the face, but he felt the cold, fixed gaze. Adam felt his blood run cold. The intruder, standing still on the wet grass, seemed to assess his every move. No words were spoken, only the sound of rain dripping from the roof and the howling wind around them. Without thinking, Adam stepped back, tripping over the porch step. The noise snapped him into action. He turned and ran toward the backyard, his phone trembling in his hand as he dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my house. He's outside now. He saw me. Are you in a safe location? The voice on the phone was calm, but Adam's mind was racing. No, he's coming after me. He heard footsteps crunching the grass and glanced back. Nothing. The darkness was complete except for the faint glow coming from Lucy's house 2 doors down. Without Without hanging up, he ran toward her place, stumbling over roots and puddles. When he reached Lucy's porch, she was already stepping out, gun drawn and flashlight in hand. "Adam, get inside now," she ordered. He didn't hesitate. Lucy took a step toward the darkness, shining her flashlight on his yard. All she saw was the empty house and shadows dancing in the wind. "Did you see his face?" she asked, locking the door behind her. "No, just his silhouette. He jumped through the window." Adam was out of breath, but something else was gnawing at him. "Lucy, he cut the power. This wasn't just a random break-in." Lucy stayed silent, analyzing the situation. "Stay here. The police are on their way. We'll figure this out." As they waited, Adam noticed something strange. Lucy's house was warm and secure, but he couldn't shake the chill that clung to him. It felt like someone was still watching, even there. He approached the window to look outside, but saw nothing beyond the rain. Then, Lucy's radio crackled. "Unit 502 arrived on scene. All clear?" "Negative," Lucy responded. "There's a suspect in the area. He was on my neighbor's property." Adam took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. That's when he noticed something that made him step back. In the middle of the yard, exactly where he and the intruder had faced off, something glinted faintly under the streetlight. "Lucy, what's that in my yard?" he asked, pointing. Lucy peered out the window and squinted. She grabbed her flashlight again and stepped outside without a word. Adam wanted to protest, but his voice caught in his throat. When Lucy reached the object, it gleamed under the light. A small knife stuck into the ground, pinning a folded piece of paper. Lucy crouched slowly, carefully picked up the paper, and read it. Her face paled, but she masked it as she returned to the house. "What did it say?" Adam asked, his voice shaking. Lucy took a deep breath before responding. "It says, 'I didn't want you. Yet.'" Adam stumbled backward, the weight of the words sinking in. Before he could process it, Lucy's radio erupted with an urgent voice. "Suspect spotted in the woods to the south. In pursuit." Lucy rushed out again, leaving Adam alone. He stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. The distant sound of sirens and barking police dogs faded as the night dragged on. Adam went upstairs to Lucy's guest room to rest. Sitting on the bed, he tried to piece everything together. That's when he noticed, in the reflection of the mirror, something that made him freeze. There was writing on the fogged-up window, as if someone had traced it moments ago. The message, short and chilling, read, "I'm still here." The intruder was never found, and the knife remained a macabre reminder that sometimes the real terror isn't what has happened, but what's yet to come.